Hey everyone. Today I am going to um, actually work out your entire quiz for you so you can kind of measure and see what you are doing right or wrong. So when it tells me to completely factor the expression, I am going to factor this and it's going to become secant squared x minus cosine x, or I'm sorry, cosine squared x. And if you did that, that's awesome and dynamite. Um, but remember, it's also secant squared x. Ooh, I need it to write smaller. Plus cosine squared x. Now, the cosine squared x and the secant squared x plus, I can't factor this. This one, I can factor more. So it actually becomes a secant x minus cosine x times a secant x plus a cosine x. And then I have a secant squared x plus a cosine squared x. That is how you factor the first one. So the second one, I am going to take out a tangent squared, and I'm going to be left with 1 minus secant squared, and it only asks me to factor. I'm done. So going on to how to simplify each of these. Remember, our goal is to get it to be one number or one letter. So a secant is a 1 over cosine, and a cotangent is a cosine over a sine, which then those two cosines cancel each other out. You're left with 1 over sine x, and if you omit that step, that's fine, but you better be able to tell me that that's going to be cosecant, see if this will start to write again, cosecant of x. Okay, so for the next one, tangent squared, I'm going to change into sine squared over cosine squared. And my cosecant squared, minus, is going to be 1 over cosine squared. They have a common denominator, so that is a sine squared minus 1 over a cosine squared, and it would be really nice if this turned into a cosine, but it's not the right form unless I do the -1 trick, which then makes it 1 minus sine squared. So use that -1 trick, we talked about it earlier, over cosine squared, which is -1 cosine of x over cosine squared, which the cosines and the cosine squared would cancel out, and I'm left with -1 over cosine, which is going to give me a negative secant x. That would be my simplified answer. So, continuing on, for this one, I would probably multiply first. So I would do my cosine x times my secant x, subtract my cosine squared x. And this is 1 over cosine, and I know some of you know that. So cosine times 1 over cosine is 1, subtract cosine squared x, which turns out to be sine squared x. Done. Negative or tangent of negative x, negative tangent x. Done. Secant or cosecant, 1 over sine x, and secant is 1 over cosine x. I've got to actually multiply both top and bottom by sine and cosine, by sine and cosine. Sines cancel, cosines cancel, and I'd be left with a cosine x over a sine of x, which is just going to be a cotangent of x. Last one, 1 over cosine x times 1 over sine of x all over sine of x, over cosine x. Everything's going to get multiplied by the cosine and the sine. So once on the top, because there's only one term, they're multiplied together, and once on the bottom. And the cosine here would cancel, the cosine here would cancel, here the sine would cancel, and I would be left with 1 over sine x, which is cosecant x. Last problem, page. So with this one, we are going to make our big giant T. I am going to pick this side so the tangents can turn into a sine of x over cosine x, and then the cotangent turns into the cosine x over the sine x. And I'm going to get a common denominator because this is one term. So I only need one term on this side. So my common denominator of cosine and sine would make it a common denominator, which then means this is going to be multiplied by sine, and this is going to be multiplied by sine, and this one would be multiplied by cosine. There we go. So this was secant of x and cosecant x. And guess what? Yes, I'm even going to do it. I win! I got the right side equal left side. Okay, so moving on to the next side. I'm going to pick left side because it's got cotangents and cosecants. So rewriting it, 1 plus cosine. Oops, need that eraser, see if it works this time. There it goes. 1 over, I was right, cosine of x over sine of x. And then I have a all over 1 over sine x. I have to get rid of those complex fractions, but they're good. Here, there's a term by itself. It's going to be multiplied by sine. Here, this is going to be multiplied by sine. And here, this is going to be multiplied by sine. So when I do that, I'm left with sine x plus cosine x all over 1. Guess what? I win! I got sine x plus cosine x. And last but not least, for the last problem, I put in my t, and I would distribute first, just because I think it's easier to distribute before I make things into fractions. So I got a cosine times a tangent plus a cosine times a cotangent. Cosine going to stay the same. Tangent is going to turn into sine over cosine. And I see right away, pitching, gone. So on to the next one. I'm going to get plus cosine of x times my cotangent, which would be my cosine over sine. Nothing cancels in that one. So I'm left with a lone sine x added on to a cosine squared x over sine x. Now, just like I had said earlier, 2 terms, 1 big one. So I need a common denominator. My common denominator is sine x. This is technically over 1, so I'm going to have to multiply the bottom by sine, the top by sine. And when I do that, I get sine squared over sine. Added on to, this has sine on the bottom, so it just stays the same. And look at that, that becomes 1 over sine, which is my cosecant of x, equal cosecant of x. My phone just buzzed, that's why I stuttered. So I hope that you guys learned something. I want you to evaluate. If you think you did it right and it wasn't my way, check with me on Monday and we can see where you're at. We're going to get more proofs on Monday, so keep up with it. I will see you then.